Welcome, brave soul. I am the Forgotten Storyteller. Before we begin, tap that like button if you dare, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're listening from. And if you make it to the end of this video, I hope to see you in the next story. I hope you're ready, because I am. Let's begin. The first thing you hear is the scratching. It's faint at first, like a mouse trapped somewhere in the walls, but it never stops. It doesn't fade when the wind dies, and it doesn't vanish when you turn on the lights. The scratching is always there, patient, steady, almost purposeful. You might ignore it for an hour, maybe two. But eventually you'll hear the rhythm in it, and once you hear the rhythm, you'll never sleep again. Our story today begins at 13 Ashwood Lane, a three-story Victorian home whose paint has faded into the color of dead leaves. Its narrow windows look more like unblinking eyes than glass. Every owner swore they heard noises from the attic. Every owner left in a hurry. Most didn't survive long enough to move out. The last family had vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle, no bodies. Just empty rooms, cold plates on the dining table, and an attic door hanging open. That was 6 months ago. Now, the Forrester family, James, Susan, and their two children, Kevin and Sophia, were unpacking boxes in the dusky afternoon light. James, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a permanent frown line between his brows, had gotten the house for a fraction of its value. He brushed off the realtor's hints about local legends and unfortunate events. Susan wasn't so sure. Her instincts told her the house wasn't right, but she swallowed her unease for the sake of a fresh start. Sophia was the first to ask about the attic. They'd been stacking boxes in the hallway when she tilted her head toward the ceiling. "Why is there a door up there?" she asked, pointing to a square panel in the ceiling with a dangling cord. James followed her gaze. "Storage space," he said. "Probably dusty junk left by the last owners." But when he tugged the cord and the creaking ladder unfolded, a dry gust of air spilled down, carrying a faint smell, something between mold and burnt wood. The attic was dark, even with the late sun bleeding through the small, circular window. Dust floated like lazy snowflakes in the slanted beams of light. In the far corner sat a single object on top of an old trunk, a Ouija board. It was nothing special at first glance. Faded letters, a yellowed board, a planchette with a cracked edge. But there was a strange stillness around it, as if the air didn't move in that corner. "Cool," Kevin said, stepping toward it. "Can we?" "No," Susan cut in sharply, her voice more forceful than she intended. "It's not a toy. Leave it." Kevin rolled his eyes and said, "Don't be so stupid, Susan. The stories you have heard are not true," but backed away. James chuckled. "Relax, it's just cardboard and ink. I'll toss it out when I get the chance." But he didn't. That night, the scratching began. At first, it came from the attic. A soft scrape, 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 then a pause, then 3 quick scratches in a row. Over and over. Susan lay in bed staring at the ceiling. "James, do you hear that?" He mumbled something about old houses settling, and turned over. Sophia heard it too. She pulled her blanket over her head, but the sound grew louder, closer, as if it were crawling down the walls toward her room. She could almost swear she heard breathing. By the third night, the rhythm had changed. The scratches were faster, almost frantic. Kevin had started waking up with his bedsheets twisted into knots, his dreams filled with flashes of violence. His own hands gripping a knife, his family's faces twisted in terror. On the 4th night, Kevin couldn't resist. He crept up to the attic with a flashlight, careful not to wake anyone. The Ouija board was waiting for him, planchette in the center like a staring eye. He sat cross-legged, laid his fingertips on it, and whispered, "Is anyone there?" The planchette slid to yes. Kevin froze, his breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" "Mireille." The name spelled itself out, slow and deliberate. "What do you want?" Kevin asked. The planchette didn't hesitate this time. "Bloodshed." His hand jerked back, but it was too late. A voice, soft and cold, bloomed in his mind. "From now on you will be my hands." Kevin stumbled back, knocking over the flashlight. The beam rolled across the dusty floorboards, landing on the trunk beneath the board. For just a moment, he saw faint crimson stains on the wood. Over the next few days, Kevin changed. He was quieter, but not in a sulking teenage way. His silences were loaded, his gaze fixed on his family as though memorizing them. He stopped eating much, slept less, and began spending long stretches in the attic. Sophia avoided him now. She swore she saw his lips moving when no one was in the room, as if carrying on a conversation only he could hear. Susan confronted James. "Something's wrong with him, James. It's that board. I told you we should have gotten rid of it." James rubbed his temples. "It's just teenage crap. He's adjusting." Adjusting? Susan snapped. To what? Whispering to the walls? On the seventh day, the house made its move. Susan was folding laundry when she heard Sophia scream from upstairs. She ran up to find Sophia huddled in the hallway, pointing toward Kevin's room. He was talking to someone, Sophia stammered, but no one was there. And his voice, it wasn't his voice, Mom. James went in to find Kevin sitting on the bed, holding the Ouija board in his lap. The planchette rested over the word goodbye. Kevin looked up slowly, his eyes oddly glassy. Put that down, James ordered. Kevin smiled, a thin, unnatural curve of his lips. Why should I? You'll thank me soon. That night, Susan couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, flipping through the old newspaper clippings she'd found in a dusty envelope in the attic. One headline after another told the same story. Family of Forrester Lane in gruesome murder-suicide at 13 Ashwood Lane. Only one survivor missing after triple homicide. Unsolved mystery of vanished resident baffles police. The survivor was always a different person. Sometimes the father, sometimes the mother, sometimes one of the children. Always the last one alive. Always gone before authorities arrived. And every clipping showed the same photograph in the background, a blurry shot of the attic with something small and rectangular on the floor. The Ouija board. Susan's hands trembled as she turned the last page. This one wasn't a newspaper, it was a handwritten journal entry, dated 1891. The ink had bled in places, but she could still read the name signed at the bottom. Mireille Black. Susan shook James awake. It's the board. It's done this before. Every family that lives here, one of them gets taken. They kill the others, and then they disappear. James stared at her half awake. You're saying Kevin's? Yes. Her voice broke. It's him. We have to stop it. They tried the obvious things first. James took the board to the backyard and tried to burn it. The fire wouldn't catch, the wood didn't even char. He tried breaking it in half, but the planchette flew from the table and sliced his palm open. Blood dripped onto the board. And then the scratching started again, louder this time, coming from all sides of the house. That night, Kevin stood at the foot of their bed, holding something in his hands. It was a kitchen knife. James jolted upright, his heart hammering. Susan gasped, clutching the sheets to her chest. The dim hallway light caught Kevin's face. It wasn't his son's face anymore. The eyes were too wide, the pupils blown black, and there was a twitch in the corner of his mouth that never seemed to stop. Kevin, James said carefully, his voice low and steady, put the knife down. Kevin tilted his head like a curious animal. She says it's time, he murmured. She's been waiting for so long. Susan's throat tightened. Who? Kevin's smile widened, the skin around his eyes stretching unnaturally. Mireille. He stepped forward and the knife glinted under the light. James swung his legs out of bed, moving to put himself between Kevin and Susan. Buddy, James said, you don't want to do this. But Kevin's arm twitched, the knife rising. James lunged forward, tackling his son to the ground. The impact knocked the breath out of both of them. The knife clattered away, but Kevin's strength was unnatural. He twisted, shoved, and rolled on top of James, his hands clawing for his father's throat. Susan grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and swung it hard. The ceramic shattered against Kevin's shoulder. He screamed, not in pain but in rage, an inhuman sound that made Susan's skin crawl. Kevin scrambled to his feet and bolted from the room, his footsteps pounding down the stairs. They locked the bedroom door and tried to call the police, but the line was dead. No dial tone. Just a faint, rhythmic scratching. Susan stared at the receiver. It's her, she whispered. James didn't argue. For the first time, he believed her. They found Sophia hiding in the linen closet, her face pale and streaked with tears. I heard him in my room, she sobbed. He was whispering to the walls. James pulled her close. We're leaving. Right now. They gathered coats, keys, and whatever they could grab quickly. But when James opened the front door, the world outside was wrong. The street was gone. Instead of the quiet cul-de-sac of Ashwood Lane, there was nothing but darkness stretching in all directions. The air outside was still, heavy, and the blackness looked solid, like ink poured into the night. The porch step ended in nothing. They slammed the door. Okay, James said, forcing his voice to stay calm. We wait until morning. Maybe it's just a power outage or... James, Susan interrupted, look outside. That's not the dark. That's... She stopped herself, shuddering. Sophia's small voice broke the silence. We're not in our world anymore, are we, Mother? The sound of footsteps came from above. Very slow and measured, crossing the attic floor. James glanced upward. He's up there. Susan swallowed hard. We can't just wait. She's making him stronger. If we wait, we die. The scratching began again, louder now, faster. It wasn't just in the attic, it was in the walls, the floors, the air itself. The sound circled them like a predator. Then came the voice, so soft, and it was female. It sounded like an old woman. You've come to my home. Now you will feed my hunger. Susan gritted her teeth. No, we're going to end this. They decided on a plan. James would distract Kevin, draw him out of the attic, while Susan and Sophia went up to find the board and destroy it. Stay with me, Mom, Sophia whispered as they reached the attic ladder. The air was colder up there, sharp and metallic against their skin. The Ouija board sat in the same corner, planchette resting dead center. Susan approached slowly, every muscle tight with dread. The moment her fingers touched the board, the attic door slammed shut behind them. The floorboards trembled under their feet. The walls seemed to stretch upward, the shadows deepening until the attic was barely more than a box of blackness. The planchette began to move on its own and spelt out the words, "Your soul will be mine." Meanwhile, James crept up the staircase, a hammer in his hand. He found Kevin at the end of the hall, standing perfectly still, his back to his father. "Kevin," James said, "listen to me. You're stronger than this. You can fight her." Kevin turned slowly. The smile was gone now, replaced with something worse, an expression of blank detachment, like James wasn't even a person to him anymore. "I don't want to fight her," Kevin said. "I'm going to set her free." He lunged. They crashed into the wall, the hammer skittering away. Kevin's hands found James's throat again, squeezing with brutal force. James gasped for air, his vision spotting. And then from above there was a scream, Susan's voice, shrill and desperate. Up in the attic, Susan clutched the board while Sophia held the planchette. "Smash it," Sophia cried. Susan swung it against the trunk. The board cracked slightly but didn't break. The air around them roared like a hurricane. The letters on the board began to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then a shape began to emerge from the shadows in the far corner. A woman in a tattered black dress, her face pale and smooth as porcelain, her hair long and hanging in wet strands. Her eyes were black from corner to corner. Mireille Black. "You can't stop me," she said, her voice like ice splintering. "The board is part of me. And now so is he." James staggered into the attic doorway, dragging Kevin with him. Kevin's eyes were wild, his face twisted in fury. Susan didn't hesitate, she shoved the board into Kevin's hands. He froze, the glow intensifying, the attic shaking harder. "Do it, Kevin," she shouted. "Break it. You're stronger than her." For a moment, Kevin's grip tightened around the board, then loosened. His expression changed. The black in his eyes began to shrink. "No, don't do it," Mireille screamed. She reached for him, her hands stretching impossibly long. Kevin lifted the board over his head, and the attic ladder slammed shut beneath James's feet. He fell into darkness. James landed hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. When he looked up, the attic door was gone. In its place was solid ceiling. The house was different now. The walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper, the floors warped and damp. A dim, sourceless light illuminated the hall. From somewhere in the distance, Susan screamed again. James stumbled toward the sound, but every hallway twisted into another. The house wasn't following the rules anymore. It bent and shifted with each step, the rooms repeating, the doorways vanishing behind him. The scratching followed him. Always behind. Always closer. Finally, he found a staircase leading upward. He took the steps two at a time, his heart pounding, and burst into the attic again. Kevin lay on the floor, the board in two jagged pieces beside him. Susan knelt over him, her hands shaking. Sophia stood in the corner, staring at something behind James. He turned and looked. Mireille was still standing there. She no longer looked human. Her mouth had torn wider than it should, her fingers ending in long, splintered nails. The shadows clung to her like a living thing. "You think that frees you?" she hissed. The board was only the door. "I am the house." James stepped in front of his family, every instinct telling him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The attic's single window looked out onto the same endless black void that had swallowed the front porch. The air was heavy with dust and the coppery tang of blood. Mireille moved closer without touching the ground. "You've all touched the board," she said, her voice echoing from the walls themselves. "Your lives are mine now. Your bodies are mine. And you," she pointed a long, splintered finger at Kevin, "you almost did so well." Kevin stirred, groaning, but didn't rise. His voice was weak. I didn't want to hurt them. I love my family more than anything. Mireille's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Then I'll do it for you. She reached out, her hand stretching impossibly far, the black void inside her palms swirling like liquid shadow. James swung the hammer still clutched in his hand, smashing it into her arm. The impact made a sound like striking wet wood, but her arm didn't break. It simply dissolved into smoke and reformed. The attic floor shifted beneath them, warping into steep angles, throwing them toward her. Sophia screamed as she slid across the boards. James grabbed her by the wrist just before Mireille's fingers could close around her ankle. "Mom?" Sophia yelled. "The pieces of the board, use them." Susan snatched one of the jagged halves. The letters on it burned faintly red. As she held it, her hand seared with pain, but she didn't let go. Mireille shrieked, the sound splintering the air. "Put that down." Susan's voice rose above the roar. "You've taken enough." She drove the shard into Mireille's chest. For an instant, the attic was plunged into silence. Then Mireille's form began to fracture, cracks running through her like shattered porcelain. Her scream this time was not rage, it was desperation. No, I can still." She exploded into a cyclone of black dust that whipped around the attic, stinging their skin. The dust shot into the walls, into the floor, into the very beams of the house, and then it was gone. The floor leveled out. The air lightened. The scratching had stopped. James helped Kevin to his feet. His son's eyes were his own again, clear, wide, and wet with tears. "Dad, I'm sorry. I couldn't stop her." "You did," James said, gripping his shoulder. "We all did." They made their way down from the attic, the old ladder creaking under their weight. The rest of the house looked normal again. The peeling wallpaper was gone, the floors straightened, and the windows showed a pale morning light filtering through the neighborhood. When they opened the front door, the cul-de-sac was back, quiet and still. The black void had retreated as though it had never been there. They didn't wait. They left with nothing but the clothes on their backs, piling into the car and driving until the house was a distant speck behind them. No one spoke for miles. The sunlight on the road looked too bright, too real. Sophia sat curled up in the back seat, clutching her knees. Kevin stared out the window, his reflection pale and thin. Susan kept glancing in the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see the house following them. 3 weeks later, in a cramped motel room 2 states away, James woke in the middle of the night. To the sound of scratch. Scratch. It was coming from the corner of the room. He turned his head slowly. Kevin was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, his back to the bed. In front of him lay a Ouija board, not the old one from the attic, but one that looked new, the wood fresh, the letters sharp and black. Kevin's fingers rested on the planchette. "She's back," Kevin whispered without turning around. At 13 Ashwood Lane, the attic is empty again. Sunlight filters through the round window, catching the dust that floats lazily in the air. The trunk sits in its corner, lid closed. A faint sound rises from within. A light scratching sound. Inside the trunk lies a Ouija board, its surface clean, its planchette in place. A single word is spelled out. "Welcome." Let us know in the comment sections, would you have left at the first chance you got, or would you have waited until the morning?
Ready for spine-chilling tales that will haunt your thoughts? Subscribe to Forgotten Storyteller for eerie narrations, unsettling mysteries, and haunting stories you won't forget. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story, because some stories refuse to stay buried. Join us, if you dare.